Okay, I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 6:01. We have our minute taker here. Mike, would you mind help keeping tabs on time?
Sure.
Thank you. So first, we're gonna open our meeting with public comment. And because we have a lot of public tonight, I'm just gonna go over some guidelines. We have, our board is committed to creating space for our community members to share their thinking and their worries or questions with the full board. But we are bound to protect our board process, and therefore we do have time limits that we adhere by for each individual public comment. So that will be a 3-minute limit if you choose to speak. At your 3-minute marker, you'll be interrupted and just asked to submit the rest of your thinking either in writing or in some other form. And just for those who might not show up all the time for our board meetings, we do use Robert Rules of Order, and we're a policy and governance board. And that just means we aren't gonna answer you directly as you're giving your comments, but hopefully throughout the course of our discussion at the meeting tonight, your questions will be answered. If not, feel free to email us and we will get back to you about that. And just the last point about public comment, we're bound to protect our students and our staff and our administration, their privacy and their dignity. Therefore, if any of your comments cross some boundaries, we might ask you to stop your comments and submit the rest in writing. Thank you so much for being here. It all means so much to us that you're here, that you're committed and interested and invested in our process and willing to sit with us as we figure this out. And with that, I'll open the floor for public comment. Yeah, Nancy.
Hi, thank you. I would just ask that I know that usually you meet, when you meet here, you're talking to each other. It's very hard to hear back here. So if you could just be mindful of that and try to use your teacher voices. And if we can't hear you, let's all of us agree that we'll raise our hands and let you know.
Sure.
Okay?
Feel free to encroach as well if you can't hear.
And please say your name for the record if you speak.
That's Nancy Cornell. Yeah. Any other public comment? Yeah.
Dan, so it's a little easier, so not looking behind everybody. My name is Robert Brooker, resident in Bristol. Head of this meeting, as you come into this meeting, everything that's going on with the budget, I just wanted to make a comment about. It seems like there's a lot of recommendations that were not followed in terms of the previous reports that were done. Consolidation of administration, other ways to cut costs. I don't know why the board, I know a lot of studies we've done, we've looked at becoming a property manager of aging property when this structure that we're in now was such a problem with that as it gets older. Also, seems like things need to be done to balance the amount of administrative staff within the district compared to students' needs and other staff that would better serve the students. The Vermont Department of Education says that the average is 182.5 students per administrative staff. Bristol Elementary has 3 administrators. Less than that. That doesn't make sense. It seems like. But there should be better use of the resources that there are to be able to serve the students the way that they need to be served. There's other things that should be changed as well in terms of it seems like threatening emails were going out about staff being cut instead of me trying to meet a budget in a better way. So that's something that should not happen.
Thank you, Robert. Yes.
Alan Quittner from Starksboro. I have noticed, first of all, I wish there would have been more information about this meeting. I understand it's a regular board meeting, but the meeting is important for people to understand how this is going forward. So my little piece on the forum was the only thing out there to let people know that there was a meeting tonight. They know there's a board meeting, but what the agenda is. So I think I was a little disappointed. I look at the numbers of students. We have 1,100 students that we're working with. And it appears to me there was $5 million for administrative costs, salaries, and so on. I would like a better explanation. There were two different categories for the administrative amount on the budget. So I would like to see that identified. I believe with 1,100 students in the district, we should be able to come up with a good staffing of teachers and look at what the administrators are doing. I don't know how we're spending that much money for a district that has 1,100 students. That's what Mount Abe used to house back 20 years ago. So I would appreciate if you would look at the administrative salaries and look at the number of students in the different classes to see. It's very hard to move the students. But if the students stay together and can be shared with another teacher, that makes all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? We have Kathy Apgar online as well. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to the action item of approving our agenda. Can I please have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Kylie.
Second.
Mike, thank you. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Next, we'll move into the board management and governance piece, starting with the action item of adopting an updated fiscal year 25 budget.
All right. I'll share the screen. Walk you through an updated presentation. I think Justin's also.
Thank you.
Okay, so at the last meeting, the board set two targets for me to bring proposals back for. One was a target of 12.5% on the post-CLA tax rate for the town of Bristol. That was the highest impacted town of the four. And the other was an under 10. I interpreted that as 9.99% increase on the tax rate post-CLA in Bristol. So those are the two options that I brought for you tonight. The strategy that I used to find both of those was first, of course, find the savings as directed. Second, to minimize impact on students, minimize impact on staff, preserve needed capital to address facilities needs, and buy some time for larger conversations, hopefully actions to address these challenges that are ongoing, that we've been talking about for quite some time. So that strategy, when applied to the 12.5%. So first of all, we're using the same long-term weighted average daily membership. I'm just looking at Ashley, that's maybe the first time you've heard that, or no, you feel that? Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh boy, LTW ADM, as it's affectionately known. It's the new way they count sort of the new equalized pupils is effectively what that is. This presentation does use the updated yield that the Joint Fiscal Office produced on March 14th, so very recently, of 9,830. That's a $55 increase from what we were using in January's budget presentation. And just to put that into perspective, that reduced the savings we needed by over $130,000. So that was a very helpful thing to have happen on March 14th. I will also add here that the common expectation is that this yield will actually improve from here. As I understand it, this yield was built assuming $15 million in savings from the budgets that were not voted or did not pass on town meeting day. With 30 budgets, 15 million, that's only assuming 500,000 in savings per district. I think there's a chance that the savings will be greater than that. And if the savings are greater than that, the yield is positively impacted, which positively impacts the tax rate. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about all these numbers going through. So in the end, the savings that would be needed to realize that 12.5% tax rate, given this new yield, were 710,000. I sent a communication out earlier that said that that would be about 834,000 or something like that, or 44,000. The difference is that change in the yield. So the savings, sorry, that screen doesn't show up very well at the top. But the reductions to meet this 12.5% increase include not filling 3.5 FTE vacated positions at Mount Abe. And those are 3 classroom positions and half of another professional position. So these are all anticipated attrition, right? So the plan right now is that we can achieve the savings in both scenarios without a reduction in force, which is great news. And part of the way we do that is by taking advantage of attrition. So those 3.5 FTEs at Mount Abe are positions that we would take advantage of attrition for. We would also not be filling 2 positions from the Addison Consortium project. So that's ACP, which we've talked about some here. So that project, the Addison Consortium project, is something that we've been attempting to sort of evolve over time. It's not quite evolved where it needs to be over several years. So that project is going to be put on hold. We're going to be providing similar services in different ways, but it does enable us to take advantage of some savings from that program not continuing. We had also earmarked some money in the event that we could create some elementary ACP type support. But in the event of ACP not continuing, taking the 160,000 out that we earmarked for that possibility seemed prudent. We are also able to remove some teletherapy funds for speech language pathology support. We've hired SLPs, so our dependency on teletherapy is reduced, so we can reduce those funds from that. And then lastly, we would not fill a 1.0 vacant maintenance utility position. So all of those combine for $96 shy of the 710,000 needed to hit that first target of 12.5%. I'll just pause there in case there are any questions from the board on that before I kind of run through the financials on how that all works.
You think the ACP program would have probably not continued regardless of this discussion?
Yes, it was already on a trajectory for not continuing.
It just wasn't something that was going to hit the budget before we could vote on it.
Yeah, we actually just had a meeting this past Friday that was pre-scheduled even before the vote to finalize that work and have that conversation.
Okay. The 3 classroom positions, would we have filled those? In the
Likely
budget?
not,
But we were holding them in case we
because we didn't have, so these are a combination of new information. And this is true for the next scenario as well. It's a combination of new information and that we're acting on and things that we otherwise wouldn't have done, but in light of this, we are doing. So we might have kept the 160 in for the elementary support, if not for the failed budget vote, despite ACP going under, to give us some wiggle room to do something. with ACP not continuing and the budget vote, without very specific plans laid out for how to use that money, we decided that was prudent to not keep that expense in the budget.
If we weren't gonna fill the 3 classroom positions, was that because no applicants or because you just weren't gonna fill them?
Because the programming needs could be met without those positions. And this is typical, right? So we almost always build a budget and complete that process before we learn of attrition. Just because of the timing of everything. Like I'm sure we will learn of other attrition from this point forward. And every time someone vacates a position, we look very critically at that and decide whether or not to fill.
Okay.
Because taking advantage of attrition is always less painful than having to issue RIF notifications. I'll continue, but feel free to stop me if a question pops up. So in terms of the numbers, so looking at the kind of comparing the failed budget vote to this presentation tonight. So the failed budget vote was a 9.29% increase in spending. And this is a 7.19, so a little more than a 2% decrease in the overall spending that's brought forward. We didn't change the revenue at all. There was no change to the spending that would prompt a change to revenue. Sometimes there are some expenditures that when you reduce those expenditures, you're also reducing anticipated revenue. That wasn't the case here. So revenue stayed the same. So the net effect is our education spending decreased. We divide that by the same number of equalized pupils, and then your cost per pupil decreases as well. So in the failed budget vote, we were showing a 1.35% decrease in the cost per pupil over the pre-Act 127. Or the FY24, actually that should be post-Act 127. So that was an attempt to, on the state's part, to create an apples to apples comparison, right? Actual FY24 didn't have long-term weighted average daily membership at had equalized pupils. But we applied the LTW ADM formula to FY24 to create a basis for comparison for FY25. So in the apples to apples comparison, the failed budget vote was a 1% reduction. This is a little more than a 3.5% reduction in the cost per pupil. So what that amounts to in terms of the homestead tax rate, so remember this is before CLA, is about 1/10 of 1 cent of an increase from the current homestead tax rate, or a little less than 1/10 of a percent increase. So a little more than 1/10 of a cent, a little less than 1/10 of a percent increase. Unfortunately, the CLAs are still what they are. And so the effect of that relatively minor increase in the homestead tax rate is tax rates, education tax rates post CLA that are still over $2. The exception being Starksboro, but again, that caveat that while the tax rate in Starksboro is anticipated to be much lower than the other towns, because their townwide appraisal was just redone, the values of the homes in Starksboro are likely to go up significantly. So how that exactly comes out in the wash is hard to know for sure. It's probably more comparable to the impact that we're seeing in the other 3 towns than if you simply applied what you believe your current home value is in Starksboro on this now pretty significantly reduced tax rate. So just want that word of caution out there as people are doing the math at home. So when we play that out, what does that really mean? So that means if we use Bristol as the example, that's the town with the greatest projected impact, and that's the town that we use to kind of set the 2 targets tonight. This 12.5% increase represents a little under $231 per 100,000 of assessed value in Bristol, which in the failed budget was $293.60. So we're looking at a little over $62.50 improved. So it's a little over $62.50 less than the budget that failed in Bristol. About the same in Moncton, a little less in New Haven, and then of course Starksboro is less given the CLA scenario there. So again, for about the 1/3 of voters that pay based on the value of their home, they're gonna be saving about $60 per 100,000. So just seeing that in a little different way, you can see the after CLA for FY 24 and with this proposed. You can see doing that math shows you that it's 12.5% post CLA for Bristol. When we look at this using that same, the most recent median income of 2021, so the failed budget was $357 more than the current taxes for that same median. And this version is $350, so a $7 savings, which is a little less than 0.5% change. So Floyd can chime in here, but as I understand it, the negative impact felt by those that pay based on income sensitivity is less, and therefore the benefit when you make reductions is also less. And we're seeing that play out with these numbers here. Is that a fair characterization, Floyd?
It is, and I would add that 77,978 reflects an almost 11% increase in the wages, which if you're income sensitized, the previous presentation showed, I think it was 70,000 for average income in Addison County versus the 77. So that $350 also reflects an increased number of taxable income reflective of the income sensitive piece of the formula. So there's numerous pieces here at play, and we choose to just take what the average is this year compared to what the average was last year, knowing that some portion of that increase is reflective of a wage increase, not just a tax increase.
All right, and then just putting this 12.5%, again, looking at Bristol in this case, sort of in relation to the past several years of what the post CLA tax impact has been, you can see it's still higher than most years, but closer to FY 21 and 22 for Bristol than what the 15.89% was. But definitely still higher. And that's the last slide before we shift into the 9.99% version. So I may just pause there.
I don't know if any board members on Zoom have their hands up or.
All right, moving ahead then. So in the 9.99%, same thing. So same LTW ADM, same updated yield for the 9830, which has again the same impact in terms of reducing the overall savings needed. But again, to hit this 9.99%, this was 1.49 million. It's now 1.36 million. So that 130,000 is showing up there. So to achieve these savings, it's everything we talked about in the 12.5% version. So that remains. And in addition to that, we would not fill a vacant SEL intensive coach position. So that's a position that would typically help write and help support the implementation of intensive SEL plans or behavior plans. We currently have 2 vacant positions. They've been vacant all year. This would remove one of those. We would desperately like to fill those positions. Given that we've been unsuccessful all year this year, we thought if we had to let one of these go, we would, and then work diligently to try and get at least one of those filled. If we can fill one of them, we'd be ahead of where we are this year. This would also reduce construction services by a little over 250,000. And this would use 305,000 from the Education Reserve Fund, which has a balance currently of a little over $1 million. To bring those total savings to the dollar, they're actually 21 cents shy of the money needed to hit the 9.99% tax rate increase post CLA. So I'll share a little bit about two things, reducing construction services. So that obviously goes against one of the strategies I was talking about, but that still leaves in the construction services line a little over $2 million. That reflects, so we've been trying to have the construction services increase by 5% each year to still come short of keeping pace with the increased cost of doing that work, but at least try to narrow the gap that would grow otherwise. So if I'm recalling the math, Lynn, you may remember better than I, but I think we increased from FY24 to FY25 about 114,000. So this represents effectively 2 years worth of that growth that we'd otherwise be looking to do. Nevertheless, it still leaves us with about $2 million, which we felt was enough money to continue to do really important and good work with. So we felt like we could make that change there. In terms of the education reserve fund, so that's obviously a pretty big chunk of that reserve fund. And the thinking there is one of the benefits that we've talked about in other circumstances of that education reserve fund was that that is there to buy some time, help bridge a gap. One of my strategies was to look for ways to buy that time. There in real dollars is what it could cost to buy 1 year. The challenge with that, of course, it reduces the amount in the education reserve fund. In future years with fund balances, we could choose to put money back into the education reserve fund. So we have opportunities in the future to replenish that if that's the decision the board wants to make, and then it's authorized by the electorate. But also the risk is that becomes $305,000 of revenue this year, or next year, FY25, that if we don't put that same 305,000 in, if we decide not to put any money to offset taxes, we now created a $305,000 gap in revenue, which would add to whatever we'd have to make up on spending. So as soon as you don't sustain that, it creates a hole you have to fill somehow. Which again buys us some time. That's a different problem for a different day that we can try to solve. And hopefully find some savings over the next year that this would buy us to make up for that, and that's up. I'll just pause for a minute there before I dive through the numbers on that.
You remind me, Patrick, in the construction services fund, how much of that is for unanticipated, funds for things that we're not anticipating, and how much is for planned improvements?
So it's all planned.
Right.
And when things happen that we didn't expect,
Then
if they trump what's planned,
Okay,
and so it could be zero and it could be the whole thing,
okay.
depending on what happens. Something catastrophic. Sadly, it doesn't take that much to eat up $2 million in construction services now, with multiple buildings that have hundreds of thousands of square feet. All right, I'll keep going, and if a question comes up, feel free to stop me. So this is now looking at a 5.27% decrease. Increase in the overall spending, which was a 9% in the failed budget vote. Again, revenue stays the same. Education spending is lowered because of the total expenditures going down. Same number of equalized pupils. And we're now looking at a little under a 6% decrease in the cost per pupil. So this is now about a 3-cent decrease in the homestead tax rate. So remember that the homestead tax rate is a result of two things: cost per pupil and the yield. Those two things produce this. This is widely accepted as sort of the one area the school board has authority to really change. Obviously, the education tax rate after CLA is driven by this, but this is usually the point of asking whether or not the school district is doing its part to help curb expenses.
Now, to be clear about that, there's only one of those two factors we have control over.
Exactly, cost per pupil. And even that, sort of have control over because we don't control how many pupils we have necessarily. And we certainly don't control the formula that determines how many LTW ADM we get from that. That's all state driven. So it's the closest thing to the tax rate that the board has control over. And that shows a 3-cent decrease, which is about 2%. So again, we still, even with a decrease in the homestead tax rate from what is current, we still have those pesky CLAs, which still puts us over the $2 mark in the education tax rate. What that means is, so this 9.99% increase that we're looking at now, for again, thinking about Bristol, represents an increase of about $184.50 on a $100,000 home, or per 100,000 in Bristol. That was $293. So this is a little less than $110 lower than the budget that did not pass. And then you can see it's similar for Moncton, slightly less in New Haven, and then less again in Starksboro. So looking again at the income sensitized, this now, instead of a $7 decrease, is a $62 decrease, and instead of less than 0.5%, it's now a little over 3% of a decrease, again, using the median. So this is the math that shows you the 9.99% for Bristol. And where that 9.99% falls in recent years. And so something you've heard from me before, that I've said in a lot of different venues, you know, thinking about how do we continue to pursue improved outcomes for students while decreasing expenses? That's the task at hand, right? Not just for MAUSD, it's a state of Vermont challenge. And we effectively have two approaches. We can do less of the same thing in pursuit of improved outcomes, and that's basically keep things essentially the same and reduce in various areas. Or we can think differently about how we can do more with less. My bias is to continue to look for ways to improve outcomes for students despite whatever financial challenges come our way. I think that is our obligation. And my hope is, in particular with the use of the Ed Reserve Fund, that buys us some time to continue this conversation and think about what does that look like? Bring new ideas to the table. So FY25 is likely not the last challenging budget we're going to face. Just like our prior challenging budgets were not the last challenging budgets that we've had to face. And I want to really think about how do we continue to bring new ideas forward, as I said, and find ways that reduce the demands placed on our educators each day. Those demands increase. When we do basically the same thing and reduce positions, those demands increase further. So then you have increasing need, you have lowering resources, that only adds to that demand. We have to find ways to reduce that. We also have to think about how we can redesign our system that honors the place that schools hold in their communities. We've heard that loud and clear. And we have to do so in a way that doesn't necessarily have us beholden to the way we've always done it. We have to do better than less of the same thing as our strategy to improve outcomes for students. That's the end.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the structural problem is that there's so much we don't control.
Mhm.
So even if we want to do things a different way, it may or may not result in savings. I think, you know, based on the conversation we had last Tuesday, I mean, everybody around the table, I think, I don't mean to speak for everybody, you know, we don't want to do the same, but just less. We want to, you know, to explore and find alternative ways of doing business. But there are very significant impediments to that. I mean, up until now, I mean, the loudest change in how we do business is through consolidation. I mean, we as a board really have not, dived deeply, in my opinion, into, other things besides, consolidation, which, as you just said, has been pretty resoundingly rejected by the community. So, where does that put us? I mean, we're in a very difficult position. I mean, the two scenarios that you presented tonight, based on, our conversation last week, I mean, they're great, but I think, at least from my perspective, how we came to a 9.99% budget as opposed to a 12.5% budget was a little bit arbitrary. I mean, because essentially what we were trying to do is identify sort of a range in spending that would be acceptable to the taxpayers. And so it's kind of hard to know whether we're right
Until after the fact.
until after the
Right.
fact.
Steve?
So one thing driving that last week was the fact that, we've not heard details on how to go down your preferred route. And for you to put that together in a week and for us to digest it in a week seemed like kind of an unreasonable ask.
Yeah.
If we really want to turn the budget vote around quickly, then we should explain the main purpose for that is to avoid sending out a mass RIF notice.
Correct.
That's pretty much the only reason.
Mhm.
If it wasn't for that, we really could take our time to some extent.
Yep.
And explore the issue, those scenarios that you might suggest we follow here.
The only thing I would add to that is true. And we talked about the potential to extend that RIF notification date to later in the spring.
Mhm.
So that's a way around the RIF. What that does, though, is that extends also the window in time which employees who are uncertain of their position next year may seek employment elsewhere, leaving us without the staffing we need or want to serve students. So even without the RIF, if we eliminate that, we can't avoid the other implication of prolonging budget action.
There are other implications about having the vote early that maybe isn't the topic for this particular segment of the agenda.
Mhm.
But that's really what's driving the speed of this.
Yeah.
Is really trying not to lose staff or scare staff.
Mhm.
And I think people may not be that aware of that. They think we're just rushing to jump into some conclusion here. And what we're really trying to do is not develop an atmosphere in the school system that made everybody feel like they were gonna lose their job tomorrow. And give the voters some relief from what they're seeing.
Yeah.
In a short turnaround.
And I also don't want folks to underestimate the impact of either of those things, either the impact on staff of mass RIF notifications or the impact on staffing and our ability to operate if we lose much more staffing than we might otherwise lose by a prolonged vote. So those are both very real implications.
Kristen?
So kind of in that same vein in terms of timing, based on the two scenarios that were presented, without any cuts per se, is there a way to, communicate that in a thoughtful way to the MAUSD staff so that that would allow us, and this could be part of the next article or the next item on the agenda, but to push the vote out so that our communities can get a full understanding of what this looks like, and communicate that effectively and thoughtfully so that it's not just sort of, making our town clerks have to spin on a dime and taking all the other pieces into consideration. We've got a lot of absentee voters that if we did try to get this to go through to vote on the 26th, what about all of our snowbirds? Their votes aren't gonna get back in time to be counted. So I think that's something that we really need to consider. And it's important to those people.
Mhm.
I mean, I agree. I think there's a tension between the RIF issue and the voter disenfranchisement.
Yeah.
And the other thing, you know, the way I think about it is that I think it's unrealistic, in my view, to think that we're gonna be able to make significant structural changes to the way we do business or systemic changes to the way we do business for the 24-25 school year. So essentially what we're trying to do here is we have to kick that bucket a little bit down the road so we have time to actually think creatively and think and thoughtfully about systemic change. But it's not really going to affect 24-25. I wonder, doing the balancing of, having again, not wanting to send out RIF notices, but not wanting to disenfranchise. That's a tough call. I think maybe to Kristen's point, making it clear to staff that this is part of the political community process in developing a budget that's going to be acceptable to everybody. I really worry about folks in the community who see this as, well, wait a second, we just voted.
Yeah.
And now and we didn't like it. And all you're doing is just changing the numbers around in a very complicated way that we don't really understand. How is that going to change people's minds about a second budget? I don't know. I worry about that.
Yeah, I think even if we didn't have the RIF notice thing, we had some time to talk about structural changes. It probably would be difficult to come up with a new budget based upon those structural
Yeah, it would.
changes
Yeah.
in time to even write contracts for the rest of the year.
That's why the time to start for FY 26 would be effectively now.
Yeah.
It takes at least that much time to really do that work. Yeah.
The other thing to talk about here is just what really drove this number up into the double digits this year, because we haven't seen this in the past. And we've sort of been keeping, I think, if you look at those past budget years, I think we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping a lid on things. So what is it that, that popped this thing up in the air? And the three things that I know of are the weighting formula changed. That didn't necessarily affect us. Matter of fact, I think we benefited from it and to some extent, but it affected the whole state funding mechanism to the point where the yield had to react to that. Healthcare costs went up 16%, probably because that workforce's union was trying to make up for the COVID bubble inflation period, the same as our staff is doing now. Teacher salaries are being negotiated around the state at a very high level right now, up in the double digits, because they're trying to make up for the COVID bubble. That 8.5%, 9% bubble that happened for a year and a half during COVID was way beyond what their increases were that they were under contract for. So they are trying to make up for those numbers. And they've managed to do that in quite a few communities. And the state, that's why the homestead tax rate and the yield can't react as we would think it would, even with the real estate numbers going up. So even though real estate has been taking off, the state has a mechanism to account for that. But if there's the spending on the other side is going up with it, they can't make the yield adjust to that the way we'd like it. So if you add, the weighting formula, healthcare cost, and the settled salary contracts around the state, you put those all together, the yield can't react to that. And, now we have double-digit increases. Now, will we see that next year? Obviously, what we're doing every year is comparing one year to the next. So theoretically, we'd be up at a plateau that wouldn't necessarily increase as much as we see this jump, because we wouldn't necessarily have those three factors all on top of each other in one session. So we're trying to make structural changes to sort of rub some salve on that problem, but it's not for us to completely change what we're doing to react to a one-year jump and everybody reacting to COVID inflation. That's why I think we're trying to do the best we can on a short time frame. And give it, and do what we can without really changing the whole structure of the system. That's my feeling about it. That reflects accurately what you're saying.
Yep, that's the bulk of it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, so I think the question is, what is the time frame for the vote? How, what can we do to make sure that the voters are comfortable with what we're trying to do? And whether that's March 26th, I'm a little concerned about that.
Do we want to settle on the options that were
Yeah.
presented? Which one we as a board, or if we agree that one of those is the right option, and then sort of once we set a target, then move to thinking about the timeline of presenting that?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
the way to go about this.
And to add on top of that, do people have other questions? Yeah, Kathy, I see your hand up. I just wanna see, Courtney, I see your hand up. I would like to hear from you, but if it's possible, could you wait to the public comment section at the end? Thank you so much. Okay, Kathy.
Patrick, knowing that we have two sets of negotiations underway, does the budget, the lower budget that we're presenting under 10%, give us enough cushion to meet the demands from those contracts that we have yet to negotiate?
So we only have one in negotiations right now, support staff. And this does not, so we have money budgeted in there that we've had since the beginning, and this maintains that same level that was in there. So depending on where support staff settles, if there are additional costs beyond what we're budgeted, we'd have to find those savings somewhere in this budget.
Sorry, yes, Steve, go ahead.
If we were to look for more savings than this, let's just say, we wanted to show people a 5% number. Just trying to give folks an idea of like, when is the RIF picture become more of a reality?
1% more and we're into risks. So 1% is about $227,000. So 5% is about $1.25 million. So to get from 10 to 5, it's $1.25 million of a combination of RIFs. We could talk about more money from the ed reserve, but the challenges I just talked about grow as you grow that number. We can talk about more money coming out of capital construction services, but that reduces the money we have available to make necessary facilities repairs. So there's lots of places it can come from. It will absolutely include risks among them.
Yeah, I just wanted that to be.
But, so you're talking about 8.99.
Well,
And Steve talks about reducing it to 5.
Yeah, I know, but 8.99 would not,
Mhm. Would be risks.
would be.
So if we go with one of the proposals that you put forth, go with the vote next week, the voters say no to that, then just keep going, and
Mhm.
then would the April 1st deadline for the RIFs also would go out?
So the way I understand it, So if we did have a vote on the 26th and it failed, there's no way we would have another vote before the April 1st deadline. So let's assume that that's a hard line and it isn't negotiated to extend that. Without an approved budget, I have to assume our current FY25 level of spending and issue the RIF notifications needed to ensure that we're not making commitments beyond our current level of spending, so that in a worst case scenario, we're going to be covered. So that represents over what was proposed for the budget that failed. That's more than $3 million in reductions that I have to issue RIF notices for. So everything you just saw, plus another $1.5 million plus or more. And that will be probably in the dozens of RIF notifications that have to go out. Hopefully, most of which could get pulled back once we have a budget that's approved and we can reinstate some of those positions. But you kind of have to put people through the ringer
Yeah, it's risky.
until you get to a past budget, so you know what you're working with. And that's what I'm trying to get out in front of with the quick turnaround on the vote, which is understandably a challenge the other way too.
Can we talk a little bit more about what the impact on students is between the two? So, for example, in the 12.5% example where you talked about, you could still do your programming needs without those 3.5 FTEs. Is there a way to sort of tell us generally what you mean by that or how that might be met? Other things like that compare between those two?
Sure, so we obviously have the programming change with ACP that there'd still be some money to address some of those needs in a different way. So in terms of student impact there, I think we can manage that impact. In particular, the 3 classroom positions at Mausd that primarily has an impact on class size. The courses offered, as I understand it, would not be impacted. There would be some adjustments in some departments in terms of middle school, high school to cover the courses and kind of make that all work as they're looking at building schedules. So there are definitely some dominoes that fall there. So those are effectively the things that would have the most direct impact on students.
Okay, and then even more compounded, I guess, is it even more compounded at the next tax rate of 9.99? Or does it stay about the same for the impact?
So the greatest impact there, if we go to that next level, is if we assumed we could fill both of those SEL intensive coach positions, then the impact would be negative in that we'd have 1 instead of 2 of those positions that are helping to write and support the implementation of the intensive plans. I don't know if that's a fair assumption or not, given our experience this year and not being able to fill either of the 2 vacant positions we have. So if we go the other direction and assume we could only fill one of them anyway, there's no impact to students in not filling one of those positions.
Any other questions about these 2 options on the table? Yeah, Kathy?
So Patrick, when we talk about not having a social emotional intensive coaches and cutting them completely out of the budget, who picks up the slack? Who provides that kind of intentional and intensive coaching for the children and the students?
So right now, a lot of what's being picked up there in terms of the creation of the plans, it could be building administrators, counselors. There's a couple of different folks in the buildings that are now helping to write those plans with support from our SEL coordinator and our school psychologist. So the coordinator and the psychologist aren't really writing the plans so much, but they're facilitating the writing of those plans by others. And then the impact of, if it results in fewer of those plans being generated or less support implementing them, again, falls on the school staff. Building administrator, classroom teacher, support staff, all have sort of shared responsibility over the impact of not having those plans or having plans being effective or not having the support to implement the plans.
You know, just maybe weigh in kind of with my thinking at this point. So thanks, Patrick, for the invitations. And, you know, it seems to me like we're really trying to balance two things, which is still, again, our commitment to services and to students and to the sort of educational mission of the district, while really trying to offset a sort of unprecedented headwinds that are really outside of the district, that are statewide. And so on the one hand, just last year, our electorate approved a budget to provide these very same services, right? And then this year, with the very same services, no longer felt that that was sustainable, right? And so I really like the proposal, and I think either way, but I think if we're really trying to meet the electorate halfway, that the just under 10% solution might be ideal. In that it does everything in our power to temporarily continue to meet our sort of obligations to students, while offsetting some of those tax increases. And so it's not a long-term solution by any means, right? I think your point to the moving from the education reserve, like it's the nail on the head right there, right? Like that's not something you can do year after year after year. But I think it does the trick for next year. And I think what it then means is we as a board and you as a community and everybody else who isn't here need to spend the next year to really think about what are the essential services that we as a community absolutely want to maintain, and how do we do that in a fiscally responsible way. And I don't see how you figure that out before this 26th or a month, like anytime for next year. And so I think the ability to sort of mortgage the short term so that we can have something in the future, which is kind of how I see these proposals, is a very reasonable approach. And I would hope that our communities would see that approach, that we recognize the offset or the increase in taxes, but also recognize that that's really outside of our control in many respects, right? The fact that the spending per pupil is going to be down 5% year over year, and we're still going to see a 7 to 10% increase. That 7 to 10% increase is real, but if you look across the state, it's probably about half of what's being projected, if not more on average. So to me, that's a pretty fiscally responsible proposal relative, again, to the headwinds that every other district is facing. I don't know how you react in this 1 year in such a strong way that you say, and we're gonna not have any tax increase, and we're gonna cut services, even though those were the services that we as a community agreed were essential just 1 year previously. So in that sense, I think I'm swayed by this approach. And I think could be swayed either way of the ones, but if I had to weigh in, I think the under 10%, even though it's a bigger short-term play, I think at least acknowledges that the really real consequences of those headwinds on people's bottom line.
Thanks, Mike. Kathy?
Patrick, are we at the point, if we have to do this year over year, are we at the point where we need to revisit school consolidation in order to be able to make this work? And is it something that other schools are putting back on the table as well?
I'm not aware of any other schools that are putting that on the table. I'm not certainly jumping to bring that idea up again anytime soon, for understandable reasons. And I think our community spoke pretty loudly that that's not something they're interested in. I think where my mind is going is, as I said in the presentation, recognizing the place that schools hold in our communities. Can we think differently about how we use our schools and how we're structured to achieve the savings without closing schools?
But what does that look like?
Someday,
I've heard you say this before, but I don't know what that looks like. Aside from school consolidation, where would we see enough of an impact of changing of programs so that it could be palatable to the people who are paying the bills?
therein lies the work of the next year. Exploring what, if any, options exist to do just that.
I think, and we should all be reminded that we did have, Levinson, report, which does, we haven't. We haven't dug deeply into that yet, but there are significant savings perhaps there. So that, and that's an alternative to, revisiting the topic of consolidation or closing schools.
True, and it is also repurposing schools. So they talked about sixth grade in there,
Yeah.
moving, for example, that as it stands now, moving sixth grade to Mount Abe involves a vote of all 4 towns. Each of the 4 towns has to say yes to moving sixth grade to Mount Abe, I believe, because we made that commitment to the community to not repurpose schools without a vote of the electorate, so. So that's one of the things in the Levinson report that we could talk about that has those same challenges to get to action on.
I'm really inclined, and I mentioned this a little last week, just because our district is so small comparatively to most of the US, we have the ability to really problem solve in a way that a lot of people don't. Even Vermont is well known for our problem solving and like thinking outside the box. So I just think about how we have all these staff, many of which have been here for a long time. And how do we pull together a table? I'm certain those folks on the ground have some really clever ideas, and if not ideas, also just like a hierarchy of needs within our schools of what is really valuable and what is not working. And how do we bring it? I think about way back, a few years ago when the community came together to solve some of these problems, and we all came together, we worked in breakout sessions and kind of problem solving and just trying to get creative. And I don't know if there's a way this year. I also think that brings the staff in as players, and like these decisions that are being made, they have a little bit of a say in and can get creative about. So I don't know if there's a way to put that into PD time somewhere in the school year. I know it can be limited, but just keeps coming back to me.
Yeah. I also think, we have an advisory council that right now is working on the revised strategic plan, but not that that's the be all end all, but that's a group that can play a role in gathering input and helping to think this through as well.
It's going to impact them, their morale, their job performance, whatever happens.
Yeah, Liz, so I think I would like to, I appreciate that idea because there are a lot of ways in the Levinson report that I think the email that you sent out, I appreciated in it that it noticed that you don't want to just, on a person who is already has a very full plate to then say, how can we add more to this plate, right? Like if that's the only approach that we're gonna extreme sister schools, there were a lot of things in there, yes, but a lot of them that I don't think would make it a very, in an environment where we're working really hard to fill positions, I don't know that that's appealing. It's not necessarily we've had feedback in the past already about it not feeling appealing to go from one school to another school and provide services across many schools. I mean, these are things that we have heard over the years, so I hope that in the conversations coming up that we don't as a community take off the table some of the things that we had considered. I mean, I think even going from nobody even considering consolidating schools or working with a district and merging districts to having even 1 out of every 4 people saying that's an idea, and they did vote for it. I mean, I think going from those not even being something anyone had even thought about or considered, and in the course of a year saying, maybe that could be okay, or in a couple of years doing groups, that it's not. I hope that we don't take the bigger options off the table for our communities and that we look at our prioritization. services, programs. What is most important to us, and at what point in it do we put those under a different priority? When do those get lowered down on the ladder to being less important than something else? So I look forward to the conversations that happen over this next year, really taking into account every level of our district, people who are serving our students and what they need and what works. So I think for tonight, the way that we're going about it is great, because there is no dramatic shift, but I hope that we, I look forward to the conversations and not taking anything off the table, really, at this point, and kind of getting a fresh look at it. So I would like to move to support the 9.98 budget, if it was
99.
9.99. So there's
It
got,
matters.
that's only, that's only for Bristol, right? So is there a number that we should be using that covers everybody
It does cover, but if you said it first.
if we set it for Bristol? So I'd like to move to approve moving forward with the 9.99 budget for Bristol.
I'll second that.
Is there any other discussion about that? No other discussion about that movement, that motion? So all those in favor of setting the updated fiscal year 25 budget with a target 9.99% tax rate. All those in
Post COA.
post COA.
For Bristol.
For Bristol.
For Bristol. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, so.
I can try.
Yes, I think just add post CLA after the 9.
If it's helpful, I can give you the amount to reduce the spending by, and that applies to everybody. I don't know if that's any better, but
It's just hard when somebody says
Total
total budget,
budget.
someone states.
we're in total budget.
Would you
Maybe
wanna
that's the way
use
to do it.
Dollar amount spent, total budget.
Yep. So approve it, that's a good way to go, because then that translates into the future ballot and warning. So that would be a budget expenditure of 35,652,401.
35,652,401.
Yep.
So to approve a budget expenditure of that number. Is that the motion?
I should have a friendly amendment to that.
That's-
Does that work for you,
Yes.
Liz?
Thank you.
Second that.
All those in favor? Say aye.
Alright.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right, our next item is to approve the budget revote timeline with March 26th as the revote date. It sounds like we had some questions about that.
Make a motion, then discuss, or do we want to discuss first?
Yes.
To the extent possible, we were trying to give you motionable language in the agenda, which we struggled a little bit last time, so.
I'd like to discuss more.
Okay, so why don't we discuss it first and then we'll make a motion out of our discussion. Okay. Would you like to open it first, Steve?
Sure.
Okay.
So, I think the absentee ballot issue is substantial. And also, I think just trying to even alert the
Sorry,
rest of the
Steve,
public.
can you speak up, please?
I think the absentee ballot issue is substantial, and I think even just trying to inform the public, even more than the folks who are here tonight or who have been paying attention, Um. Understanding your issues, Patrick, with the staff. If we were to negotiate an extension, how much time could we negotiate, do you think, without obviously talking to anybody about it?
2 weeks seems like a reasonable request.
Um,
And then much more than that, you're approaching May, and then again, just the longer it's prolonged as well, I think the longer it's prolonged, I think the greater concern from the union perspective. So there'd be interest in wanting to minimize that window of extension. But I also think that implication of loss of personnel, because until they're under contract with us, they're free to look for a contract elsewhere. So if we're approaching a month later on that, that risk grows.
Right, but given the fact that, we can put this budget scenario in front of them. In terms of the anticipated impact,
Mhm.
obviously they know we don't have a vote. But. At the same time, we're. Being. Prudent in warning them about the possible impacts, we can also now inform them as to what we think those impacts are going to be.
Mhm.
Question for the audience,
Yeah, too.
is that 2 weeks enough?
No, it isn't.
If you were to give us a time, hey, can you give us your name? Just
Amy McCormick.
Amy McCormick.
I'm the town clerk in Starksboro, so the earliest that would be comfortable for me to get out to the voters with the information and the ballots would be during the week of April break. And that you're giving a full period for internet and warnings, lots of discussions within the communities and the ballots for them to decide on. If you do it by March 26th, you're eliminating probably a good 25% of the residents of all the towns to vote. Absentee ballot is a big thing now.
Thank you.
So that's the week of April 22nd.
But I think since we took that, if we're gonna take public comment, we should take all the public comment right now. if we're
Well,
gonna-
I asked, I specifically knew if the person was in the audience and I needed the information. So
Right.
this isn't necessarily public comment.
I just think we could consider having a moment if we were now instead of at the end of the meeting, if the board would be inclined to get feedback right now.
I understand.
Barb also had her hand up.
Do you want to do that as a board?
And how do people feel about that? Do we want to get a consensus of public comment? How are people feeling about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Kathy says yes. Barb, you're good. Justin, you're good? Okay, so. To be respectful of Courtney's time, Courtney's had her hand up the longest. If I might call on Courtney first to do public comment.
Hi, I just had a few questions. I know everybody's trying really hard to get the budget down. We all know there's stuff that needs to be done around the district to make it pass. A year ago, when you did the Levinson report, it said the district was top heavy. And if cuts were made from there, that we would save a significant amount of money. I know there's a lot of scuttle around the Bristol area, since Bristol seems to be the hot topic tonight, of why not start cutting from the top, essentially saving money there, moving central office to a place where it would make more sense. And if we have an ERF of a significant amount of money, why not use that, as Mike had said, I think, to tide us over so we can spend this next year working on a decent budget for fiscal year 2026. The money's there. I understand that something might come up where that money will need to be used, but if we have it there right now and make cuts where cuts should be made and that money can be put back essentially. And if we're looking for effectiveness on costs, Bristol has 3 principals. Is that really cost effectively the best thing for us? If there's a lot of money going to the top, start shredding some of it there and putting that back in. And especially if we're talking about RIF notices, like we have so many positions listed on the MAUSD site for Mount Abe, for Bristol, for the other 3 schools that we can't even fill. So if we can't fill those, why are we talking about riffing positions that we do have filled? When a lot of scuttle is that cuts at the top could help alleviate some of that. And let teachers teach and not have coaches. That's another thing that's been going around. Let the teachers do their jobs. There is a lot of opinions of how jobs should be done, and they're not allowed to do what they went to school to do. And they're at school trying to do the best that they can, with a lot of chit chat all behind them of micromanaging. So I guess just, I'm not really sure why all the RIF notices are talked about for teachers and staff when we can't fill the positions that are listed. When the Levinson report said that our district was top heavy. So in all honesty, shouldn't we be looking there to shred to start? That's it, I guess. So.
Yeah, Alan.
I apologize for not being here in November and October when we should have all been here working on the budget. But I'm looking at the budget and the 11 million for teaching staff. I would like to know, and I think the public would, how many teachers does that include? Then we have like vocation. There's $13 million on this page besides the teaching staff. And I think it warrants, as somebody else said, let's look at these positions. We're not ripping these positions. And so I think we need to first look at the teaching staff itself. And the teaching staff, if they had the time, they could do their own evaluations, and that's quite effective sometimes. I'm not saying, I don't know which is better, whether having a coordinator come and evaluate or have your peers. So this is what I would, if you want to extend the time, the vote to me is just not practical. I got a funny feeling it will be voted down again, but I might be wrong. We can have bets. So let's look at the 11 million and let's look at the 13 million that I'm not fully understand what it is. And for example, is a guidance counselor a teacher or is that a different category? Is a teaching staff a guidance counselor or does that come under, there was some service, student support service?
So this isn't really a Q&A right now, Alan.
Okay, but anyways, I would like to see that 13 mil looked at after you look at the teaching staff.
And what's helpful, I think, about the public comment, I'm sorry, is that we can take notes. I don't know, Erin, do you want help? So that when we do our public session, like, you know, hey, this is something you want to hear about, is this particular line in the budget? If that makes sense.
And like I stated in the beginning too, you're always welcome to email us and we can get back to you on specific questions you have. Or
Yeah, so I feel for you folks, I really do. It's a mess. It's mostly not of your making, you know, please don't take it personally. It's a real mess. But I'm a little worried, original budget had tax rates, again, not of you're basically if you're making, that were really, really high, it's still gonna be high. And people were ticked, I'm afraid they haven't had enough time to get over being ticked, so that emotion is still gonna be there. And I don't think you've done. I mean, I understand, within the timeframes that you want to vote, this is probably something like what you needed to do, but you're not doing it yourselves, I think, any favor if you're not. So Kathy, said, if we don't, consolidate schools, what do we do? Well, one of the things I think you could tell the community is that you're gonna take a serious look, a commitment to seriously look at the Levinson report. And I know, Liz, some of these issues, once you get into it, you may decide, well, that's not a good idea. But this has been around, significant savings since February of 2022. Lots of people in the community are aware of it. So I think you do be doing yourself a favor between now and the 26th. You make a commitment as the administration and a board to have a serious discussion of it and tell people. I think that would be very helpful in terms of you being able to pass the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public who wants to make a comment at this time? Sorry. Hi.
I'm Lee. I moved here last year and I came from Chicago and I want to say that overall I've seen schools underfunded to failure. It was quite common in Chicago. You read the news on it. I think that pushing things down the road is the second option that reduces our costs a bit more. As much as it feels good in our pocketbooks right now, it's almost guaranteed to cause larger and costlier issues in the long run. It's like writing an IOU to your future self, except with no real plan on how to run down that path. So I think making the minor cuts that you suggested initially, the three positions that you don't have currently filled, just kind of like leaving them open. I think that's good. I don't think taking a 30% cut out of what's essentially emergency fund is probably a great idea because $1,000 is quite a bit, especially with no real plan of how to move forward with filling that. We've got enough problems with just figuring out how to move forward as we are right now. And explaining those things and maybe even throwing Chicago under the bus and saying, hey, you don't want to end up like some of the Chicago schools that got shut down. We have to figure out a good middle path on how to both fill our schools, make sure our teachers are still there, make sure our teachers are happy, make sure our students are happy, and move forward with a budget that maybe doesn't feel really good this year. But we can maybe plan on how to at least keep it the same or reduce it next year.
Thank you. Sarah Mangini.
Hi, I think there may be a few new members on the board, so I want to introduce myself. I'm a fourth grade teacher at Bristol Elementary. I also am a parent of 3 students at Mount Abe, and I live in Moncton, so I'm a Moncton taxpayer. I just have one quick point that I'd like to make. I couldn't tell who said it, but one of tonight's board members talked about a desire to hear from current staff about brainstorming possible solutions and, how we can think outside the box to do more with less. And I, excuse me, in my role as a co-president of our teacher union, I just want to say that we would be more than happy to talk and share our thoughts. And not through an advisory committee that already has a pretty full schedule for the year, but we'd be happy to meet with the board at any time to brainstorm solutions. Thanks.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I like the idea Steve had in mind of bringing it down to 5%.
bring it to 9.9 in 10 days strategizing. I didn't feel a couple more weeks. Into it.
You want to just state your name for our minutes?
Sorry.
Can you just state your name for our
Oh,
minutes?
my name's Joe from Starksboro.
Thank you.
Can I speak as a taxpayer? I'm Floyd Davison. I'm a resident of Bristol. I have 12 kids that I put through the school system. I will never in my life pay enough taxes to get the benefit I'm receiving. Having said that, it's important to recognize this is the only place that we get to vote on that increase. When you go to the grocery store and that box of noodles that was always 99 cents is now $1.39. That's 40% that we don't get to vote on. But that tax impact, inflation impact is real. Recognize that an increase here is reflective of all of those costs that the district pays, from staff to oil to paper and pencils. All of those items come in, and when you look at it from that view, that you're willing, without exception, to buy that box of noodles for $1.39 rather than 99, a 40% increase. And we're fighting over 3 cents or 4 cents increase percentage for this. It's impactful. I don't mean to minimize that, but I think it's important at times to step back and think about what is happening in our checkbooks at home already, and to expect that the board can just magically say, we're going to not increase our spending because we don't believe inflation is actually happening. I would say this board vote reflects, this board budget vote reflects the reality of the cost to educate kids. Thanks.
Thank you, Floyd. Teresa Guile. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm from the Bristol community. And I think the one thing that I just wanted to piggyback with what others are saying is I think that we have to have a look at every piece of the puzzle. And I've not once heard anyone say on the board, just explain why we're not looking at the costs for the administration as opposed to it should be broken out so we as taxpayers can see both those budgets. And I know that it's not, but when you're asking us to vote, and I have no issues, I want children educated, I want to support the teachers, I want to support the administration, but when there's no line that we can look at and really differentiate between the two to even know if we're top heavy or not top heavy, and not have one board member even ask that question, it's concerning to me because that should be a question. And the Levinson report has indicated that in many ways that we gotta kind of band together and put our hats. These teachers, these administrators need to wear additional hats. And I think that I wish that there was a way that we as the community could get that breakdown, could see where those, I don't know, but I really would like to know, are we really top heavy? Because that does make a difference. We all have to sacrifice, including the administration. And maybe there's no where we can sacrifice there, but I've not been shown anything that gives me that comfort level. So, I've said my piece. I just think that we as the community and you as the board need to ask those tough questions. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else before I move on? Okay, we're gonna close this medium public session and move back into our budget timeline discussion. Barb, you've had your hand up.
Hi there. Thanks to Patrick for putting together the choices, the hard choices that we have to make in such a short timeline. But I just wanted to comment that I think a couple things could be considered. The idea of perhaps moving or buying some more time for the vote seems important. Educating the community as to what exactly the issues are and why they should get out there and vote. And lastly, I was just wondering, it's a question for Patrick. Is there a way of perhaps buying some more time for the teachers with like letters of intent or something like that that might be able to guarantee some of the staff that wanted to staying on, if it worked out that way? So.
Yeah, so we pursued this when, so when we don't have a contract that's settled in time to issue sort of employment agreements for the following year, we issue letters of intent to reemploy. So those are legally binding offers to employ folks. We just don't have the details on the employment compensation essentially and working conditions. So we can't do letters of intent. They're effectively legally binding to employ.
Is there anything that maybe we could have research in a short time that might buy some time?
I really don't see a path where there's an agreement that we don't have to uphold. That's essentially what I think you're looking for, is saying like, you have a job unless something happens where you don't have a job.
Okay, thank you.
So at the same time, you're handing out, let's just talk about the scenario where you have to revert back to last year's budget, and you've got $3 million worth of cuts you gotta make and RIFs that are associated with that. At the same time, you're probably sending out letters of intent to the folks who are not getting RIF notices. So you're sending out both of those at the same time. Just to.
Yeah, right.
Part of the saying, so staff that's not potentially on the block. And you have to go through the whole exercise of deciding who you're going to give the RIF notice to when you weren't planning on giving any RIF notices out.
Correct.
Which sounds like fun. So I'm trying to figure out some way where we can give folks who, a significant number of folks, the ability to vote. While perhaps alarming the staff, but being able to like rub their belly at the same time. I don't know how we do that other than, you know, showing out the details of the revote along with, you know, an explanatory letter of why they're getting the notice. Now, whether that would send everybody off to the door looking for other jobs, I suppose it's possible. I'm not quite so sure that it's potentially the issue that it is outside of theory.
Hard to know.
Hard to know.
Kathy?
I've checked in with the town clerk in New Haven, and she agrees with the member of the audience who's a town clerk in another town. And her comment was the week of the 18th of April would probably be best because the following week, too many people would be gone. And she felt that we could get absentee ballots out and back if we acted very quickly. I'm sorry, looking the wrong month. So the week of the 15th, like either the 16th or the 18th of April, instead of doing it during the vacation week of the 22nd of April, when so many families are gone on break. That's more doable, and it would give us time to formulate a good response to the questions we've heard tonight. And Patrick, if there's any way that you can negotiate that extra time, knowing that we are trying to keep everybody's best interest in the forefront, maybe the teachers would allow us to go until the 18th.
Brad.
Yeah, I just follow up on what Steve was talking about. I think that the, I mean, the taxpayers, teachers, the board, everybody involved in the community, we're all kind of need to work together in this. And I know that in the agenda tonight, we're supposed to be talking about communication and outreach. So I think it would be incumbent on us in developing, how we're gonna do that, to make sure that the staff and the teachers are fully informed and feel like they're, part of the team, so to speak.
Kristen.
To Kathy's point, I wonder if, with the New Haven clerk's concerns about break, if we choose to go with the week of April break, would potentially that could, in theory, give those enough time who will be out of town to get an absentee ballot in instead. And it wouldn't be this, the turnaround time would be much quicker. Just, to kind of put that out there.
Any other thoughts? What it sounds like to me is that we're interested in not holding a vote on March 26th. But I'm getting.
Yes.
That's so then we need to talk about, if not on the 26th, do we have to wait for our teachers union to agree to extend time for us so that we can warn a ballot, or are we able to set when we'd like to warn a ballot and then ask them if they agree?
I think not acting tonight only delays the vote further.
Correct.
I'd rather have a date to work with the union around to see if we can find something that works than engage in that conversation without knowing what it is even that we're striving for.
Okay. With that being said, there have been two times we've heard of, either the week of the 18th, somewhere in there, or spring break week, the 22nd. How are the board feeling about either of those two options as something to work from?
For what's worth, we did hear from town clerks that Tuesdays are preferred days.
Okay.
That'll be what, the 16th or the 23rd?
23rd.
The 16th feels like maybe a small compromise, and as Patrick said, 2 weeks. I also think from like a staff perspective, knowing where things stand before going into break might be reassuring too, rather than like getting the vote count during your vacation, and just from that perspective.
Is Tuesday preferred because that's when people generally vote? Or-
I don't know, I can't really speak to the details of why Tuesdays are preferred. We just heard that Tuesdays were preferred.
Yeah.
Wasn't unanimous by any means among the town
Is that
clerks,
why?
but
That is why, because we all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously can't do it on Friday because a lot of clerks don't work on Friday.
well, and there will be, in terms of the conversation about when to extend the contract notification. If the vote happens on a Tuesday, I think the very earliest we could get contracts out would be that Friday. Takes a few days to turn around that process, but.
That's a 3-week extension.
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of what I brought up earlier, I'd like to do it as soon as we can do it, that makes sense. And I think trying to hold it in the middle of a vacation week just sounds like it's complicating things.
Kathy?
The Public Engagement Committee, I guess I'd like to hear from you folks about how you feel you could get a message out and how quickly you could turn it around and hold a meeting.
Well, community engagement, just like every other committee, isn't slated to meet until early April. But if we needed to bump up a meeting, I suppose we could probably make that work. As far as what messaging and all that, I would wait to see what we think about tonight as we're talking about that on our agenda and then propose something from there. I can't tell you right now what that might be. But that can be on the table as something we look into, depending on what happens tonight when we're talking about our communication plan.
Yeah, I think we're required to have an informational meeting anyway, so.
Yep.
I don't know, that just has to be fit in, which we are already planning on doing even if it was on the 26th.
So how are people feeling about the 16th? Steve's a thumbs up. Brad, neither here nor there. Kathy's good, Barb looks good. Justin, how you feel about the 16th? Justin looks good. Okay, so it sounds like we're interested in April 16th as being the new warning date.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Kylie. All those in favor of April 16th as the new warning date, please say aye.
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 Opposed,
Wait,
or sorry, the voting date,
Yeah, just,
not warning date, sorry,
Yeah.
voting date.
sorry,
Thank you, Mike.
yeah,
I read warning.
to the voting date,
Voting date. Thank
then
you.
aye.
Thank you. Aye.
Good stuff.
No opposed, any
Alright.
abstentions?
Hold on,
Yeah. Steve? What did you,
Approve April 16th as a new voting day.
thank you.
So approve, Steve, you first, who was second?
Kylie. I didn't catch your vote. You were aye, okay, thank you. Okay, so that motion passes. Well, item C was adopt a warning and a ballot, which we had prepared but is now going to be changed. So for that, do we table that item or how do we move forward with that?
we could vote it in as amended.
Okay.
And then we have it, so as soon as it's ready to distribute, it can go out. In terms of notice, I mean, part of what we're talking about is giving more notice. So the sooner we can warn it, even though we push the date out, the more notice we're giving folks.
So is there a warning and a ballot attached to this agenda?
There's not, but I have hard copies here.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna make a motion to adopt the warning and the ballot with the new voting date. Reflecting the new voting date.
and the new budget amount that we didn't know until you
And
just
the
took
new
that
budget.
action. And two likely changes to the voting locations. And so those are all highlighted in the documents that are coming around. So in terms of the ballot, the change, the only change is to the amount of money that we're asking for. So that's highlighted on the ballot that's coming around. That's straightforward. In terms of the warning, that same language on the warning would get changed. And in addition to that, and in addition to the date change that you talked about, the talk right now is that New Haven would vote at a different
town
location than
offices.
they would in the town offices.
Town
And
offices.
likewise, Starksboro would vote in, I think, a different location. Was that right? Yeah, at the town offices as well. So we would make those changes to the draft that you see in front of you as well.
Just as a point of order, if someone could read what you all have there, because we don't have it remotely.
You're talking about the warning?
Yes.
I can read it if you want.
Okay, Steve, yeah.
I can scan it and send it to you.
So, we haven't already changed the amount here, right? So,
Correct. Yep. So this is the old amount.
so the warning reads exactly as it did before. Do you need all of it read again, Kathy? The
Yes,
only-
please.
Or do you want just the changes read?
If you could read it, in its entirety, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So here's the warning. Mount Abraham Unified School District, Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro. The legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District, consisting of the towns of Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro, are hereby notified and warned that voting on Article 1 shall take place by Australian ballot on Tuesday, March 26, 2024, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the official polling places of the respective towns comprising the district. Be voted upon by Australian ballot on March 26, 2024. That would actually change to the new date. Article 1, shall the legal voters of Mount Abraham Unified School District, MAUSD, authorize the school board of directors to expend the new budget amount. That's spelled out in both word and in number, which is the amount the school board of directors has determined to be necessary for the 2024-2025 school year. For the purpose of voting by Australian ballot, and I don't know, Patrick, why that's broken out into two. Why is that?
In terms of broken out into two, I'm not sure.
Why
what
is that restated?
About Australian ballot.
Oh, because this is built upon when we have an annual meeting where some items are voted on from the floor.
Oh, that's.
Okay. We could probably strike that line, but in other words, we don't.
Because we have only the one item and it's only Australian ballot
Yeah.
for that one item. Yep.
All right. So the remainder of it is in-person voting will be available at local polling places on March 26th, which will be changed to the new date from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. To request to have an MAUSD absentee ballot mailed to you, please contact your town clerk. Absentee ballots must be returned before the close of the town clerk's office on the day before the election, or to the polling place before 7 p.m. on the day of the election in order to be counted. Voters of the town of Bristol will vote at Holly Hall, located at 1 South Street, Bristol, Vermont 05443. The polls will open on Tuesday, March 26, 2024 at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. The voters of the town of Moncton will vote at the Moncton Town offices located at 92 Moncton Ridge, Moncton, Vermont 05469. The polls will open on Tuesday, March 26, 2024 at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. Voters of the town of New Haven, that's missing, will vote at the New Haven Town Clerk's office. I don't know that we needed, that needs an address. It's not 76 North Street. New Haven, Vermont 05472. The polls will open on Tuesday, March 26. Again, that'll be changed at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. Voters of the town of Starksboro will vote at the Starksboro Town Clerk's office with that address, Starksboro, Vermont 05487. The polls will open on Tuesday, March 26th, date to be changed at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. On closing of the polls in Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro, the ballot boxes will be sealed, transported to, and reopened at the Mount Abraham Unified School District Central Office in the town of Bristol, where the ballots will be counted and commingled by hand under observation of representatives of the boards of civil authority of the towns of Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and or Starksboro, under the supervision of the clerk of the Mount Abraham Unified School District. That's the entire warrant.
Thank you, Steve, for doing that. The New Haven Town Clerk's office is at 78 North Street.
Yes, I'm sure we'll be looking that all up when we modify this.
I thought I'd save you a trip.
The official ballot reads Article 1, shall the legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District authorize the school board of directors to expend the new budget amount in both word and in numerical form, which is the amount the school board of directors has determined to be necessary for the 2024-2025 school year. Yes or no?
So is that amount the 35,652,401?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Yes.
And Vicky, if needed for the minutes, the Starksboro Town Clerk address is 2849. You don't, okay,
No.
just making sure.
That's reserved for the.
Oh, right.
Am I right? Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
But thanks.
You're welcome.
So the motion is to adopt both the warning and the ballot. With the modification of the budget amount, the polling places, the date of the vote, and striking the words "for the purpose of voting by Australian ballot" that appears after Article 1 in the warning. And adding the word "of," sorry,
Which appear after Article 1 and the warrant.
and adding the word "of" after the town, between town and New Haven in the warning.
Was there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Kathy? Mike was a soft.
Yes.
All right. Any other discussion about that? No? Right. All those in favor of amending both the warning and ballot and adopting those as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Right, the motion passes. Next up, we have developing a communication plan. And this is set as an action item. So the action is to develop a communication plan, and then once we develop it during this action, secondarily, we'll move to approve it in the next agenda item. So can I get a motion to develop a budget communication plan?
So moved.
You, Kristen? Second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
All right, Mike, thank you.
Yeah, I'm totally.
Fully on board.
All right, where do we want to start with developing a communication plan? Yeah, Kristen.
How, I think maybe for me, thinking about kind of working backwards from, when we will vote, I'd really like to see us get the most bang for our buck in terms of time to communicate. So what sort of timing is needed to prepare a communication so that we can set up meetings and thoughtfully communicate to the communities?
So we had a proposed informational meeting time frame for the 26th. That was set how far back from the 26th?
1 day.
So the legislation for a revote allows you to hold a revote 7 days after warning it. And you can have an informational session at least 5 days after, so. That was where the Monday informational session was actually 6 days later, so we covered the 5 days, and the vote would have been 7 days after tomorrow. So we covered that in that window. Because we're well beyond that. And still under the not less than 30, not more than 40 window of a typical vote. I think we have a lot of flexibility. I think we need to keep the informational session within a couple of days before the vote still. I don't think we want to have that 2 or 3 weeks before the vote. I think it should be a few days before.
Well, I think having a 2 or 3 weeks ahead of goes against, I think, plenty of time. do we want to reissue a flyer? Does that give us time to reissue?
I think so, yes. Our printer actually has reached out to us to say, so are you gonna be needing any services? To try and get things in the queue, so I think they're willing and interested to help get things out.
Yeah, Kristen.
I think if that's the route that we go, I think it's important, and it was very clearly heard, that we really need to be proactive in getting in touch with our communities well in advance. So if we are able to kind of, look in that printer's crystal ball and say, hey, when do you think this can be completed? Because we really need to be able to let people ask questions, and, sort of have some sort of a guideline for them. It is complicated. It's not just a simple formula. So, I think we just need to really be thoughtful about it, is kind of what I'm going for.
Yeah, Brad.
Do we have any kind of communication specialist we can call on?
Not any that we employ. We'd have to contract with someone.
I don't know. I mean, I thought the flyer was great. I got a little bit of feedback from folks saying that there's a whole lot of information in a small place. And again, this is very subjective, but just kind of hard to kind of process in the way that the first flyer was presented.
That's like kind of what the constraints or parameters of those flyers are, right? I mean, in some ways, like what can we include, what can't we include? Because I don't know.
Can't include anything that says, like, promotes a yes or a no vote.
Right.
Nothing that would be identifiable, but for the most part, that the restrictions are really more around the space we have to work with and the expense. Like you could mail something as thick as the town report out if you wanted to do that. And the cost would be much higher. So it's a matter of finding that right size of the amount of information, and the expense to deliver that information and make it digestible.
We're not, we don't have a second article to explain, so that frees up some space.
Yep.
But which would probably be taken up by explaining what we're cutting.
It makes sense to put the flyer out that has the date of the informational meeting. So timing those.
What about using QR codes on what's sent out? Because it almost like simplify it so people can access more information, like almost like give them like just the highlights or a teaser. I mean, everyone has their cell phone on them. Scan it, then they can access all the information that they need to. I don't know if there's a small fee for that. No, a lot of them are free. It's like time. Yeah, you get like a 30-day trial. Yeah.
And it usually just brings them to a website somewhere that has more information on that
Just thinking
particular
like
topic.
if there's a space constraint. Kathy?
I think that's a great idea, but I also know from staffing the polls that a good percentage of people in New Haven just would not have access to a QR code. That would be not something in their wheelhouse. And I think we also heard pretty clearly at the annual meeting that it seemed like the information came out too close to the vote. As fast as we can get this information out and give folks time to think about it. I don't think you want it within just a couple of days, the informational meeting within a couple of days of an actual vote. I think you ought to give them a little time to mull it over and ask more questions. Patrick, did you ever find out if the Secretary of State is going to cover the cost of this vote in this district?
Our understanding of the legislation is that the Secretary of State's office covers the costs from postponing the vote for those that took advantage of that.
Well, sort of, aren't we postponing it a little differently,
Well,
The voters postponed it.
I'm not sure it's in the same way that they were thinking of how the postponement would be covered.
Barb?
We could ask the question.
Happy to ask the question.
Yeah, I got some feedback, as far as people not knowing where to find the information. So whatever we send out in the mail, maybe we can make a list, including the QR code if we decide to go that way, of places that, folks can go to find information. For example, if there's going to be something at the supervisory union, from Porch Forum or whatever we decide those places are going to be, people can choose whatever's easiest for them to access.
Maybe this is a question for you. Would you be willing to do another one of your, presentations? That was really helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I
That'd
guess
be
it would be
awesome.
useful to know kind of to what extent do we want to sort of recapture what's essentially unchanged? And to what extent should that be short and focused on essentially what Patrick has presented, which are,
Right.
you had a budget, we've walked you through, there are these resources to talk about that. This is the change that we did and the sort of motivation for that change.
I think that's what it wants to be.
Yeah.
So
We
in
can
that,
certainly point them back at the original budget.
Yeah.
That we formulated, that was included in our annual report.
Yeah.
They want to see what the budget is. They want to find out where administration charges are different staff charges. They can look in the annual report budget.
yeah, I think,
But this is really all about communicating what's different from the vote.
I think that's straightforward.
How important is it to approach it with as much information of, this is the vote that wasn't approved, this is the 12.5, this is the 9.99.
I don't know if
Or-
we want to complicate it with
Yeah.
12.5 at this point, because. I mean. People want to know if we considered something else, we could point them to the meeting minutes. but,
Right.
In terms of trying to keep things
Simple.
simple. I'm gonna just put our eggs in our 9.9 basket here.
9-9, just put it there.
With the, so I think we're gonna do our regular, we'll do our hybrid informational. We'll do a hybrid informational. Finance committee probably wants to meet before you do that, so maybe all of our committees meet a little earlier than we were planning. And support, that, and it could be a starting point as a collection for questions, right? Just like last time, you like email all the questions this way. And the sooner that we do that, finance committee presentation, those questions could be sent along to maybe be addressed and give time to think about things such as that, no matter the size of a district, there needs to be a superintendent. Questions like that, thinking about things like that, whatever comes along. And that certainly a superintendent can serve a much larger district. That's one of the big reasons that we were talking about for GEMS, is that the same amount of administration can serve a much larger number of students doing essentially the same work. Things like that come to my mind that can be worded more accurately, with some time to think about it. And yeah, like what's appropriate to answer at that time. And maybe at this time, maybe we want to think about as a community engagement committee what those next steps are. Like, I mean, maybe this is the time because we have, I feel like, more engagement than we have since there was a merger vote a couple years ago. We haven't had this much connection and people listening and hearing and wanting to be involved. So we could kind of utilize this moment to maybe make a plan for maybe the board wants to have a couple summer sessions or a meeting at each elementary school like we've done in the past. maybe we want to start planning that work right now and get that word out to kind of instigate just some community conversations that are fairly open to that. But like now might also be a good time to utilize the momentum.
Was the flyer sent out to the schools or just, you know?
No, it was mailed. So the way the printer works, once we get the flyer finalized, they print and mail out to all the 4 towns.
Can we distribute them, send them home with the kids also?
Sure. We would just have more printed than we might
Right.
otherwise, yeah.
A lot of the schools only really do electronic
Yeah. You have your parent
information.
email chain, right, that you
Mhm.
broadcast
Do
to.
it that way?
Well, we have Blackboard Connect is a tool that we use to send those messages. So that's an easy way to send it electronically. If we wanted hard copies, we could put it in backpacks.
So the vote is on the 16th. We want to have the informational meeting on the 9th, week before. That was our normal committee meeting night. We could do. I think right now the committees are really just reviewing their charges at this point. So maybe we take a half hour, let that happen, and then have the informational meeting after that.
Unless we were feeling like committees wanted to meet earlier to sort of meet more demand of how we're gonna communicate with people. But are you thinking we'd do that at the April 9th? No, you're thinking we'll do the whole informational then,
Well, we need to do an information meeting.
right? So maybe the committees are meeting before then.
So push the committee night up to the 2nd.
Yeah.
I'd support that date.
So April 2nd, the committees would, presuming it's the finance and facilities, that newly formed sort of merge committee, would finalize the messaging that would go out, both the presentation that would happen at the informational session, but also the voiceover or whatever is going to be sent it out, like the updated version of what went up before.
What if we did a joint meeting with the community engagement committee as well, so that we could, but would we have a quorum though?
I mean, it might,
Yes.
it might just be a board meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is important enough work that we
I would agree.
not slough it off to committees.
Okay.
Make it a board meeting and.
Well, we have the quorum issue, so yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 Be a board
That's-
meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Aaron, to that point, maybe we can reach out to the community engagement committee and say, here's what's going on. If,
Mhm.
if everyone feels that we need to still meet, then we can discuss, but here's where we are.
Mhm.
Well, we could hold our. Could hold our normal committee meetings
On the 9th.
on the 9th, just an abbreviated version of it, just to take care of business.
Yep. Yep.
And hold a full board meeting on the 2nd.
And
And the 9th is also the informational.
The 9th would
Yeah.
still be the
So,
information
okay,
meeting.
both
The
of those.
2nd would be the full board doing
It'd be a planning session, basically, right?
planning session, Q&A, kind of.
Meeting?
We could have like a draft, whatever presentation that we might be thinking about giving ready before then. And share that with the full board, and that way we can have feedback and amend it accordingly before we actually release that out. That's one
Do we
possible.
want to get a flyer out ahead of that, or do we want the flyer to go after the 2nd?
I would think a flyer beforehand,
Yeah.
and then we being Mike in the lint in his pocket, prepare the informational, communication, via PowerPoint or whatever it is. Kind of thinking again about the 2nd, that'll also give us some time to, if there's feedback that that community members want to send to us. To, kind of bring to the table for that April 2nd meeting. That way, we can kind of come with, with questions that we know that people are asking.
How much lead time do we normally give the printer?
I think it's normally about 2 weeks. And that might be from the time we send the finalized version to when it's arriving in mailboxes, but I'd have to double check with Jennifer to be sure. I guess I have a question too about what's the process you'd like to use for the development of the flyer that goes out?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, how do we put that together?
I feel like the sooner everything, the better. Right,
We have,
so, and I
we have a
think,
standard business meeting on the 26th.
We
Right,
give,
That's our normal whole business meeting.
so could we? Oh, we probably won't, but if we could, I don't know. Kind of feels like even the second, if we were ready to do a presentation that night for community engagement, that would be great by
Yeah.
then. So I don't know how full the agenda is for the 26th. If we kind of. Decent, pretty full, but we could always meet for 4 hours.
But I don't
We
think,
could,
Good old
we don't
times,
have,
yeah.
yeah.
I don't think we wanna do. I don't think we wanna gather public community engagement on the 2nd.
No,
No, because we're doing that.
On the night.
on the 9th, but then it's so, and then the following week you do your presentation. 15th. Like, you
Well,
just
if
see
we're-
what I'm saying? Like, I just feel like our little thing that we're doing, it would be nice if it were further away
Yeah.
from what you're doing.
well, and if we're mirroring, I'm not sure which presentation you're thinking of, but if we're mirroring the process we did before, I didn't give a presentation, so
Right,
I just
true.
want to know if there's a presentation request of me and for what date that is, but that's a different strategy than what we used before. If we're talking about the informational flyer,
Yeah.
I can work with Floyd and we can draft something and bring to you on the 26th.
That's what I was
Okay.
thinking.
Yeah.
And then we can kick that around however we need to here and we'll have to leave that meeting with it approved. And then get it out and ask for as quick a turnaround time as we can. Maybe we can do better than the 2 weeks, but I have to ask to find out for sure.
Yeah, it would come out, people would have it in their mailboxes on or about the day of the information.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can easily distribute it electronically the next
Before
day.
then, yeah.
Right.
It's really the printing and the mailing it out that will have a lag.
Then that gives people a whole week to think about it before they vote.
Yep.
So what are our thoughts about the 2nd and the 9th informational meetings? Is that close enough to the vote to be fine? Or are we gathering questions? Because some questions I'm not, I don't know. I wonder if it's just more comfortable having administration be able to address some of my concerns.
So just to be clear, there's only one required informational meeting, and I think we should denote one as the informational meeting specifically, and I think that would be the 9th, which is a week ahead of time. I think that's similar to past practice. I think that's fine. I think locking yourself into 2 official informational sessions right now should maybe be risky.
There's a lot of time between, today, March 18th and even April 2nd. Is there anything we can get out before then? Given the fact that even if we approve a flyer on this, the 2nd, still have, it's just.
Well, the flyer approval wouldn't be the 2nd. The flyer approval
The
theoretically would be the
26th.
26th. That's a week from today. So a week from
Right.
tomorrow, sorry, a week from tomorrow is the 26th.
But then if you have 2 weeks, then you're talking about 3 weeks from now, from today.
But a week from Wednesday, we can get the flyer out electronically and we can put it on Facebook and everything else. And then there would
Oh, I
just
see
be a
what you're saying.
follow-up hard copy mailed to homes. We don't have to mail something to homes. But it covers the bases of the folks that aren't online checking things out.
And besides, it's on Facebook, the website.
Front Porch
obviously Front
Forum,
Porch Forum.
we can do a Blackboard Connect message.
Have we used the newspaper before?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something worth exploring or is that too slow?
I think you have to be thoughtful about sort of character, number of characters and all of that in terms of, so you have to really pare down the message to have it, I think, be effective in the paper. And obviously we'll get some coverage. I see Maren's on here right now, so we'll get some for free, but if we wanted to pay for additional, that's always an option.
I mean, even if it was just Matt Abe's informational meeting is 419.
Right, and, or, yeah, the informational meeting and the vote is, and here's where we can go to get more information.
Yeah.
And something simple, in,
Advert.
maybe in every Addy Indy issue between now and then.
Well, a warning goes in the paper, right?
Right. Yeah, but
That's kind of like.
That's all-
back page.
that's all-
Because of, you know,
You see it every
the-
Monday
the
and
public
Thursday.
notices. You read those? It says a lot about you. Liz.
Oh, yeah. Not effective.
So right now, we're saying flyer, draft on the 26th
For approval.
for approval.
Okay.
The second is a working board meeting to basically go over feedback we've heard so far,
And we'll have a draft presentation.
a draft presentation of what will be presented at the informational meeting.
Correct.
And since it's an open public meeting, people can come and watch that happen. If they'd like to go to both. And then the official informational meeting will be on the 9th with a abbreviated committee meeting just prior.
What time would you want the informational then, if we're doing that?
You know, I think if we're gonna do a full board meeting on the 2nd, we could probably squeeze the committee in.
I was just gonna say
We
that.
could squeeze the committee working session, you know, to review charters and stuff. I think we'll probably squeeze that in on the 2nd. I would think.
So do
And then
an
the
hour
9th
of the
would
board
just-
meeting and then
9th would
an
just
hour
be,
after for,
Regular informational meeting time at 6 o'clock or something.
okay. So with that idea then, Steve, are you thinking 6 o'clock board meeting on the 2nd with the committee meetings to follow?
Maybe we just get the committee stuff out of the way
Yeah.
quickly at the beginning.
Community
Like a
engagement.
half hour or
has-
something.
Yeah, a half hour and then do a full board meeting after that. And then obviously whatever is available to put out electronically can go out as soon as it's ready and whatever formats we want.
Mhm.
And the mailer is just up to the printer and here we are.
And we can queue up the printer to know that something's forthcoming next Wednesday, and that may help.
Get a slot.
Expedite it maybe.
Everybody online clear about that? Does that make sense? Is that a gigantic motion, Vicky?
Steve moves all of that.
I'll second what you said.
What I have is, the draft language, excuse me, draft language for the flyer will be prepared by March 26th. The board committees will meet on April 2nd at 5:30 PM, and then the full board will meet at 6 PM to review feedback and it's heard so far and to review a draft presentation. The official informational meeting will be on April 9th.
So moved.
I thought it,
So
I thought I heard something different in there.
Where did you
we
hear that?
added the flyer stuff.
I thought I heard that the committees were gonna meet at 6 on the 2nd and the board meeting would start at 6:30.
Yes.
Okay.
And I heard you say that the committees were gonna start at 5:30.
Yes, you're right.
Did,
Yeah.
Yeah, like-
because he said half an hour before, so I just
Yeah.
stuck 5:30, so. Okay.
And
So, committees will meet at 6.
6 and then we'll full board at 6:30.
right now you're making a motion for approving a communication plan.
I think that's what I'm doing, yes.
Okay, just wanted to be clear because we were
Well, you
on.
have a motion, excuse me, for Kristen and Mike had already to develop a budget communication plan.
Right.
And then the second
And then-
action after that was what?
Right, then we would move to approve that communication plan. So we develop it, then we move to approve that.
So I don't think you voted on the, to develop.
Yeah, I think that's.
Right, that's where my confusion is.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just withdraw the
We could have
development.
done those two items
Undo
differently. I
that.
think one could have been a discussion item and then
Yeah,
a motion.
the motion just opened the discussion, basically. So I can withdraw that motion if Kristen is willing to.
I am happy to.
Okay, so we'll just get rid of
That
that
motion is
previous one,
withdrawn.
and then we'll approve the one that Steve just did.
So everything that I read off.
Yeah.
So we're merging them.
Yeah, the action,
Okay.
just nothing happened.
Do you want me to put a time in for the informational meeting on the 9th?
That'll be at 6 o'clock as well.
Okay. All those in favor? Oh, wait, walk me through this. Do we have to? What do we do?
I made the motion, but maybe a second.
No.
I'll second.
But they removed a motion.
They removed the motion to start working on it,
Yeah, to develop the plan.
to develop.
So it's gone. It's like. it's
We
not
don't have to
a
do
thing
anything about that. So it's
No, it
just
was
voting,
withdrawn.
This is
just
the
voting
next-
on this
is
new
the
one.
Next item, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, all those in favor of the new motion on the floor? I don't recall all the details off the top of my head. For all the informationals and board meetings, please say aye.
I,
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so that motion passes. So that was approving a communication plan?
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. That was the whole thing. Okay. We do have another public comment section on our agenda. If any other public would like to comment. Bailey.
Hi, Bailey Brennan from Moncton. I was just thinking something that is important for somebody to say out loud or put in writing is, with this new budget, what will be happening in central office? Because I know a lot of people who voted no because they wanted to make sure central office, that they thought they had to vote no on both. So I would just want to make sure that that's loud and clear, the plan for central office. Also, I think the board highlights that were going out are a nice little snippet for people to get information. And in the past, there's been a lot of feedback of saying, oh, that was helpful. I couldn't attend the board meeting, or I couldn't watch the whole thing. So that might be another way to say, look what's coming.
Thank you, Bailey. Any other public comment? Yeah.
Ross Brooker again. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that I hope this is kind of a sounding board and a wake-up call to start working on next year's budget as soon as this one is finalized and passed, because this is a problem every year. Tax rates only increase. It's not the best vehicle to fund this stuff, but it's the one we have. Something should try to be done. The superintendent presented some ideas earlier about moving forward and alternative solutions and coming up with those. Like to know whose job that is to present that, change that, who is in charge of the structure of the district on the functional level, the organization chart. At this point, maybe time to possibly change who's in charge of that, or find a different way to do it. Things need to change. Just asking for more money, more taxes every year is not sustainable, and we know that.
Anyone else for public comment? Okay, I don't see any. All right. Now I get a motion to adjourn at 8:25 PM.
so moved.
Yeah, Steve.
Do we have a draft agenda for the 26th?
Yep.
Does that include talking about central office?
Not currently.
you think it might.
I think it would be useful to have at least, if it's possible, an update on possible thoughts moving forward, just because I think Bailey's comment is correct, like. If we have a public meeting and the board is unable to speak to that issue ahead of the second vote, I don't think that's gonna inspire a lot of confidence.
I would agree.
We would have a very full board meeting that night if we added that to the agenda. If people are feeling that that is something they need in order for us to move forward and get that to our community, we can add it, but we'll add time to your night that night. I'm just, it's not a warning or a threat or whatever, it just
No,
is
no,
the
no,
fact that
I
that's
get
what
that,
will
I get
happen.
that.
I
I'm
know.
curious, I'm curious in terms of, this agenda. Are we able to talk about it? Since we did not warn it.
About adding it, probably not.
So I'm talking about it right now.
And we didn't amend the agenda to start
And
either.
we didn't
so
amend the agenda.
There might be people that would have stuck around tonight if they'd
If
known
we
that
were
was a
talking about
topic.
that, Yeah.
We do have somebody lined up to come from the VSBA
Mhm.
to provide training on board authority, which was identified at the last meeting. That could probably be postponed if you wanted to create space.
How long would that be for? Cause that also feels really important
Well,
right now.
Typically, we've
what was-
allotted an
what was the
hour.
topic again?
Board authority, so individual, subcommittee, full board. That was one of the two sort of leading trainings that emerged from the conversation at the last meeting. And that was the one that we could have somebody available for the 26th, because at the time, it looked like the agenda of the 26th had some room. But it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Personally, I think I would prefer to postpone that.
I would as well.
Yeah, it's such an obvious question that people are asking,
Yeah,
and for us to just sort of ignore it is probably not the best way to go.
I would agree with that.
Keeping in mind our authority. Right. Right.
So we could try to move it
Well
to the
said.
next business meeting in April.
Yeah, I mean, education is always important.
Yeah.
It doesn't supersede what we're up against right now.
And that would just be a discussion item on the.
Yes.
just the purpose, yeah.
I mean, it might result in some information going on the flyer.
Mm.
There was a point or something you wanted to make on the flyer, would there be an opportunity to add it?
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts?
I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Steve, so we'll adjourn at 8:29. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you, everybody.